gives me great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mohamed Nasheed, former President of Maldives here, to welcome all of you here, to welcome the High Commissioner of Maldives, Her Excellency H.E Mohamed Nasheed, His Excellency Mr. Khalil, the Minister of State Foreign Affairs of Maldives, and all of you here. I was just mentioning yesterday to President Nasheed that the city of Delhi, we talk about the weather, the polluted skies, but we've not yet got there where we feel really concerned about it. And therefore it's really good that somebody like you, because if you look at his career, and I'm not reading his biodata, I have no paper in front of me. If you look at his career, fighter, two things. One, against authoritarianism towards democracy, a long fight for which he's paid many a price. And the second was that shot that we all remember on the Coral Ocean floor holding a meeting of his cabinet. Because many times symbolic acts have a lot of effect on people's minds. When you see a sight like that, it does tell you something about a 0.5 meter rise in the waters. We can forget Maldives and small countries of the Pacific as an example. I don't want to forget them, but just for the sake of argument, look at the effect on a state like country like Bangladesh. Tens of millions will have nowhere to go. So you look at it globally, you have to be really concerned about these things. The world is changing very, very fast, faster than we thought. 1970, Toffler wrote a book, Future Shock. 30 years, nothing happened, we forgot Toffler. But when the future is now suddenly upon us, it is here. We have the technologies available, we have other mitigating measures. The famous line, of course, think globally but act locally. But there are hundreds of small things that we need to do all the time. And I think President Nasheed will be, climate change is an issue, as I said, that is very close to him. We'll be speaking on it. But before I ask him to speak, all of us are very, very familiar with this. Right? We all have it. Anybody here don't have it? No. Please switch it off. For 1 hour, 45 minutes, can we do without it? That'll go for me also, don't worry. I don't apply rules arbitrarily. President Nasheed will be speaking to us for some time. And then he's free, he's open up to some question and answers from all of you. At that moment, I'll tell you all about the question and answer rules, the ground rules of Q&A. Let me talk later. Once again, Nasheed, welcome to Nehru Memorial. Very good to have you with us. An honor for all of us for you to be here. May I now request you to say. Yes.
I'll just say.
But you crept in afterwards.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, everyone here and those perhaps listening to this from abroad. All countries in South Asia stand to be severely impacted by climate change. Bangladesh is threatened by rising sea levels, which will cause ever more catastrophic flooding and an exodus of refugees. Nepal and Sri Lanka faces severe droughts and flooding. India faces droughts and floods as well as heat waves. Meanwhile, the loss of Himalayan glaciers could see the Ganges run dry. Like all South Asian countries, my country, the Maldives, is also threatened. In fact, climate change is upon us. The coral reefs that protect our islands and provide us with food face extinction by ever higher ocean temperatures that bleach and kill corals. And we face the longer-term threat of submersion by the rising sea. I don't need to remind you that the highest point in the Maldives is just 6 feet above the water. Weather patterns are also changing, while erosion and water contamination are getting worse. Although the Maldives is vulnerable, just as all South Asian countries are, we are really not prepared to die. The Maldives have no intention of becoming some of the first victims of the climate crisis. Instead, we are going to do everything in our power to keep our coral reefs intact and our heads above the water. We harbor no illusion about the dangers of climate change. For the Maldives, climate change isn't an environmental issue. It's a national security threat. It's an existential emergency. The recent IPCC report is clear. Emissions must be reduced by 45% in 12 years to stabilize global warming at 1.5 degrees. That is a daunting task. It is especially daunting when you consider that after a pause of a few years, global emissions are rising again. And temperatures are soaring. All around us, we see the terrible impacts of climate systems gone wrong. Terrible heat waves baking Europe, super hurricanes and typhoons leaving trails of destruction in their wake. A few weeks ago, Chicago was colder than planet Mars. All this after just 1 degree of warming since the industrial age. And politicians talk about allowing temperature increases by another degree. Even though climate change is causing more devastation, that doesn't mean we are going to give up. Among all the doom and gloom, we find hope. For me, one of the biggest rays of hope is India. Back at the Copenhagen Summit, climate conference in 2009, with my friend, the former Environment Minister Jairam Ramesh, the Maldives and India found themselves on opposing sides of the climate debate. The Maldives was calling for rapid action to stop climate change, to keep global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees from pre-industrial times. For the Maldives and other low-lying countries and areas like Bangladesh, the Maldives, we need 1.5 degrees to survive. If temperatures shoot past this threshold, our very existence is in doubt. Back in 2009, though India, along with other big developing countries such as China, were blocking the progress. They were hiding behind this illogical argument that the West's industrialization brought us to the climate edge, and developing countries have the right to burn coal and push us over the edge. This position was mad because it led to mutually assured destruction. Thankfully, in recent years, India's position on climate change has shifted. I was at the climate talks in Poland last December, representing the Maldives. And India's position had completely changed. India really helped to push progress on combating climate change, and India was supportive of the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, which is really important for the Maldives. I couldn't have asked for more constructive partner to work with than India. You might think that I am saying all these things because I am here in India. No, you have actually changed. It is clear that India cares about safeguarding our planet and protecting its neighbors in South Asia. This is really important for the Maldives because we see climate change as one of our gravest security threats. And India has always been the net provider of security and safety in South Asia. So when we see India helping on climate change, when we see India acting constructively at the climate talks, when we see India investing billions in clean energy, like solar power and nuclear energy, then we know that India is taking our security seriously. This is good for the Maldives, good for South Asia, and good for the world. Even if the world stopped producing all carbon emissions tomorrow, we would still need to adapt to climate change because there is future warming already trapped into the system. So we need to adapt. In the past, this has involved building seawalls, water breakers, and other very heavy engineering. Essentially, we've been pouring concrete. But building concrete seawalls is extremely costly. And they also damage the coral reefs. In order to save the Maldives from climate change, it doesn't make sense to concrete over the coral reefs, which protect our islands from the rising seas. Instead, we must learn to work with nature, not against it. In our quest for climate adaptation, we don't want to destroy our coral reefs to make seawalls. Instead, we need soft but smart adaptation strategies. We must build seawalls that encourage coral growth. And let us see the best that nature has to offer. Mangroves can protect us from storm surges even better than man-made water breakers. In fact, we have much to learn from, again, India in this regard. India has replanted vast areas of mangroves precisely to better protect its shoreline from storm surges and erosion. Of course, we cannot adapt forever as the world gets hotter and hotter and hotter. All nations, big or small, rich or poor, are in this together, whether they like it or not. It's just madness for us to allow global carbon dioxide levels to go beyond 450 parts per million and temperatures to shoot past 1.5 degrees. That can still be prevented. If we come together on the basis of the emergency facing us, the world can do it. If we don't, we will all have hell to pay. The Maldives is not prepared to allow that to happen. This year, as part of our commitment on the UNFCCC process to stop climate change, the Maldives will strengthen its national determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. The new target will be based on the new Maldivian President Ibrahim Mohamed Nasheed's commitment to aggressively adopt solar power and renewable energy. I am heartened that other nations, including those as vulnerable as we are, planning similar things. The Marshall Islands, through a leadership of Climate Vulnerable Forum, has become the first country to submit new targets under the Paris Agreement. Many other vulnerable and industrialized nations have also committed to drive fossil fuel out of their economies. This is welcome and hopeful news, and we need to do more. Before I end, I would like to touch on some of my concerns regarding the UNFCCC climate talks. While I accept that the Paris Agreement was an important breakthrough from stopping climate change, and while it is really important that all countries get on board and help global effort, there are serious problems with the way the talks are set up. It's difficult to escape the conclusion that the talks have become part of the problem. I've been watching climate negotiations since 2009. Of course, I haven't been to every meeting. I missed a few of them because I was in jail in the Maldives. And you don't get prison leave to attend climate conferences. But over the past 10 years, I must say nothing much seems to have changed in the UN process. We are still using the same old dinosaur language, still saying the same old words, still making the same tedious points. The same old diplomats who don't seem to agree on much other than to have another round of talks 12 months later are still there. Perhaps it's time to consider some really hard truths. Carbon emissions keep rising and rising and rising. And all we seem to be doing is talking and talking and talking. We are not winning the battle. Half of the problem is that we still call for emission cuts. And countries are still reluctant to make cuts because they equate making cuts with making sacrifices. And no political leader likes to make sacrifices. You don't win elections on a platform of making cuts. So instead of asking for cuts, perhaps we should be demanding increases. Increases in investments in clean energy. Huge increase in clean energy. We should ask countries to invest so much into clean energy, they will stop investing in fossil fuels. We need to reframe what the climate talks are demanding. Let's demand something positive rather than something negative. If we focus more on investments in clean energy rather than cuts in emission, I think we would see investments go up while pollutions come down. I also think that the UN climate talks need to change in many other ways. At the moment, you only see progress when every country agrees to move forward. The talks require unanimity. But when every country has agreed before moving forward, you sail to the speed of the slowest ship in the convoy. And the biggest problem of climate change is that of time. We don't have much time to fix this problem before it spirals out of control. So we need to come up with a more imaginative way to allow countries that want to move quickly to do so. And we need to stop people lagging behind from being able to veto things and slow the whole process down. I have spent much of my life trying to bring freedom and democracy to the Maldives. When I was elected in 2008, I started fighting against climate change too. The fact that I was ousted in a coup d'etat in 2012 made it clear to me the fight for democracy and against climate change are one and the same struggle. How many autocrats are dependent on oil revenues to prop up their violent regimes? How many of those who damage established democracies are also climate deniers? At the same time, we cannot ignore the recent violence on the streets of Paris, where working men and women protest a modest increase in fuel prices. Here's the thing about climate change. We can't frame it as a war between working people and saving the planet. If we do that, we will stir up the forces that led to the wave of populism that has engulfed the West. Let us not forget that we owe it to decent working people such as coal miners and oil rig workers. The tremendous wealth that the world enjoys today, the technological progress, the huge increase in living standards, is because of the work of these people. We should not blame coal miners, loggers, or oil rig workers for causing the climate crisis. Instead, we should thank them for helping to fuel human civilization. Coal miners are not the problem. Coal is the problem. And we confuse the two at our peril. When it comes to acting on climate change and shifting global economy of fossil fuels, I propose a test. The working people who stand to lose most from the end of the fossil fuel age should be the first to gain from the new clean economy. And we should apply that test before each and every intervention that we make. When we can march through the streets hand in hand with the miners and rig workers and protest for climate action, then we will have unlocked the politics for transformative change. We Maldivians are a nation of survivors, and we will do everything we can to ensure that survival of our country. But we will only survive as a nation if we also survive as a planet. So let us join together, commit to a clean energy future, and make investments in clean energy our blueprint for survival. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I forgot to add at the beginning that Mr. Nasheed is a very brutally frank person. If he praises you just now, when he thinks you're wrong, he'll tell you to your face that you're wrong. And we saw it. But I think you raised a very good point about the Paris thing. The fact is that in India, where tiger is so important as a symbol, if you posit the tiger against the human being, the tiger won't survive. It is how do you do other stuff that's so important. We are open for questions. We'll take questions. We will start at questions. Somebody really has a comment to make, a very important comment. Please do so, but do it in a manner. Come back there.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We all know that you are not only a
identify yourself.
I'm Yogendra Kumar. I'm a former ambassador. As I said, we are great admirers of yours for your fight for democracy and for climate change. I just want to make one point. Of course, you did talk about India's role at the time of the Paris Agreement and earlier. I think one thing we must not forget here, as I see, that climate change as an issue has become an issue exercise of global power. And that's why you see the Kyoto Protocol, and before that the Framework Agreement, the basic commitments assumed by the Western countries have actually been junked completely, because of which developing countries are facing these kind of problem, including India. And I can give you just one example. Of course, you know, transfer of technology and funding support. For example, talked about the coal-fired power stations. There has been a proposal that there could be retrospective refitting of the coal-fired power stations, because of which the carbon emissions can be reduced. Now, nothing of that kind actually happened. So sure, India actually is playing an important role as far as the climate change, the threat is concerned. But we must not forget, and we should not be quite generous in terms of our assessment of the role of the developed countries. And of course, I won't talk about Trump and Germany, where they've increased the coal production. So has US. And of course, recent Katowice summit agreement, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and some other countries actually were fully opposed to the agreement. Thank you.
Yes. My name is Sagar. I am from the technology side. And Your Excellency, you have spoken very nicely. And what I could hear from you is the emotional touch in your speech. But when we look around and we go and we watch South China Sea, we have seen Chinese have created an island in themselves. And when we look around the Holland, we find they have done marvelous work on sea reclamation. As far as Maldives is concerned, why don't we try to bring something innovation so that the island can reach to some stage where this, climate change cannot bother you? So there are a lot of technologies involved. Why don't you talk about the technologies which can create something better? Thank you, sir.
Sir, my name is Siddharth. I work here as an educator at the planetarium. So I'm also a research student. With all due respect, sir, I would like to ask you one thing. One of our members just mentioned that we should not talk about Germany and US. I would rather, humbly ask you, why not talk about Trump? You talked about imaginative ways of bringing on board all the Western countries. So I would ask you to mention some of the imaginative ways that you mentioned to bring at least Trump or maybe someone from Germany on board. Because we already know that they have backed out from Paris Agreement and all the various intricacies of it. Yeah.
Thank you. 10 years ago, climate change was taken as an ethical issue and a human rights issue in a sense. But now it is not. It is an economic issue. Solar now is cheaper in any given situation than most fossil fuels. Recently, in a bid in India for a power plant, the renewable bid was cheaper than the coal bid. So even if Trump or anyone else wants to encourage coal or anything, that's not going to happen. California is the fifth largest economy of the world, and it is becoming rapidly carbon neutral. Germany had its feed-in tariff system that basically brought the price of solar down. And of course, yes, now Germany has gone back to, they have removed their feed-in tariff system and they've removed their subsidies on it. But I think more and more it's becoming an economic issue and not an ethical issue. So when it is an economic issue, it's more likely that it would be solved. Now, so your first question was, we should be mindful about the West, and they have to deliver and they have to be responsible for what they have done. I completely agree. But this doesn't necessarily mean that developing countries have the right to keep on emitting. Now, the West has brought us to the brink, and then I am told that you want to push us off the brink. For me, that sounds madness. I don't think that we should be talking about anyone emitting carbon anymore. And we have the technology. So you mentioned about the new technologies that we have. Yes, we want a floating island, not a reclaimed island. And the floating technology, it's available, it's there. The amount of gadgets and gizmos around is just amazing. And if we can bring all that together and then start using these new ideas and new technologies for our use, we will go a long way. We must adapt. There's no other way. We've already done the harm, and therefore now we should be getting ready for adaptation. The Maldives is spending 15% of its budget on adaptation. We spend 12% on education, 13% on health, and 15% on adaptation. So, this is becoming very, very expensive for us. And the new adaptation should be different. What I'm suggesting is, for instance, to build a water breaker. It costs us $8,000 for the revetment inside and the water breaker outside for a meter. And we have 2,000 islands. So this is just impossible and you can't do it. But it costs less than $40 for a meter of reef to grow. And it takes less than $5 for you to grow a mangrove, a meter of that. So we must be using biological adaptation measures that can also have the same impact. Yes, we must be using the technology. So how do we talk to Trump? I thought I answered that. It doesn't matter. He doesn't matter.
Yes. Picture, Besraji, 1 minute. Picture.
Sir, I am Kesav. I am from Center for Vietnam Study. Sir, in Yemen government, China was the largest investor in the Maldives. We know that China is bringing the old technology to Pakistan, cold technology, we can say that. So what's your take on that? China is more investing in the South Asia, in the cold technology, where China itself went to the threat level of the coal. That's why they set up the coal technology to Pakistan. What's your take on that, sir?
Well, my name is Gill, former nautical advisor to the government of India. My main interest is the role of shipping in this. But however, sir, first of all, tell us what is your background. You are like a lion on the subject. We are proud of you for the way you spoke. But tell us your own experience. Has Maldives lost any land, any territory because of it happening? To commitments when you give, how far you are coordination with the government of India? These 2 points. Third, of course, if you have any interest in the maritime or aviation sector, we'd like to hear from you.
2 short questions from here.
I'm Shalogna. I'm editor of Geography and You. I have a few, submissions. One of them being that, when you talk about the entire world looking at becoming carbon neutral, and we have places like Arctic area where we are opening up for mining actually for oil. And, I don't see anything getting abated in that sense. And all the Arctic countries are very much keen to mine oil in this entire region. That's one. Second, we have mining in the oceans. The CIO in India is engaged in mining inside the oceans, So a new world order, in the sense that I don't see us moving away from fossil fuels very, very, very soon. So I'm a little cynical about that. Second submission that I have is like the solar. I am not very key, I'm sure we'll find some way, but at present I don't see a way because the solar chips that the panels that we put up, it's supposed to last us for 25 years. Even in India, the efficiency gets very low and we have to discard it in about 6 to 7 years, which means these things are toxic to the soil. They have to be disposed. We don't have a disposal plan. So we have new problems coming up with renewable. Renewable is not problem-free at all.
Thank you. We'll do one more round after this.
Well, China is still investing in old technologies. Now, my point is, if you want to be the leaders of tomorrow, you have to embrace the new technology. The internal combustion engine and coal, they are obsolete technology. They are Victorian and they are obsolete and they are big and they are cumbersome, dirty, untidy, loud. They are everything. Madam, compared to that, I think it's a godsend, these panels, compared to what we have in coal mines and in coal plants and in diesel plants. Yes, of course, it's sad that we still don't have effective means and ways of recycling waste. But very often it is not waste, and we do come up with ways of recycling them. So I think we will probably come up with ways of recycling them. And for those who are mining the Antarctic and mining the oceans, when solar becomes so cheap that they can't start mining, then we will start winning. I believe that in the next few years, in the next 10 years or so, alternative renewable energy would be far, far cheaper than fossil fuel, and people will not invest in fossil fuel. China would also come to understand this, I believe. Even if you call for a tender of a coal plant, let's say, in Europe, I don't think anyone is going to build it because it's not any more economically viable. So we must get the new economics out. Not argue on ethical issues. Well, of course it's an ethical issue, but it's easier to win when the economics is on your side. So you still can have the same economic outcome through a different strategy. You can still have high employment, low inflation, GDP growth and so on, but through a low carbon development strategy. And I think these strategies are now coming out. And the technology is there for the new strategy. So it's for someone to bring together a development manifesto, completely a low carbon development manifesto. I think that manifesto is possible. We ran the last elections in the Maldives on that. And we won. We won. I believe we can win. I believe you can win the next Indian elections on another manifesto, on a low carbon development strategy. My views are that the new technology is out there. It's coming. Yes, there is a time gap. Yes, the window of opportunity, the window is very, very small and it's closing. But we will we need, the world will experience a big calamity before we realize that we just have to do it tomorrow. So there will be a huge event. Let's hope that we survive that. The planet is going to survive. The earth is going to survive. It's just us who will not survive.
We'll come to you.
Hello, sir. I'm Valerie Vinita, and I'm from the museum department, the research department in it. And my question is that I completely agree with you when you say that it has all been about talks from Kyoto, you come to Bali or Copenhagen, and now COP21, and how US, of course, pulled out, and how we can take or not take from the Western imagination. But coming back to the question, I would say that, number one, you see that how much are we pumping in research and development? That is another big question. And what is Maldives doing on these lines for research and development for climate change?
I'm Abhishek Kumar, a DU student of Political Science Honours, and my question is on the emission issue. So after the withdrawal of US from the Paris Climate Change Forum, it is pretty apparent that the road ahead for climate crusaders is tumultuous. And even India and China, though they have stepped up their renewable energy efforts, they are burning fossil fuels at gigantic levels. Amid this, how do you see the fate of climate action in the next decade? So.
Hello, sir. This is Rajiv Kumar. I'm a student. First of all, I congratulate you, sir, on your victory, not as a king, but as a kingmaker. Sir, you talk many things about what Maldives, role Maldives and India is playing, or many countries. You talked about many countries and about many technologies which is being invested. But my question is, what role we, the common people, can play as far as climate change or the way forward is concerned? Means until and unless we do participate in such activity, we cannot achieve anything. So my question is, what role we should play?
Excellent question.
Thank you.
The UN process, UNFCCC process, it is, I'm sorry, it's very silly. You see, two countries agree on something, and if both of us agree on something, and someone comes along and says no, and then we reduce our ambition to that person's level. So at the end, you have an agreement on the lowest common denominator, and it's not worth the paper it's written on. So we really need to, and for 24 years, they've been running, they have children now. The negotiators have, finally the negotiators have got married to each other, and it's a huge community now. So I went there 9 years later, and they were the same people, but only that they had children because they've now finally got married to each other. So it's an industry of itself, and I really think, if we are talking about reforming the UN, this is the first place to reform. And we really should do it quickly. And it costs them $70 million in Poland to have that talk shop. And every year, we got the Paris Agreement, but we still do not have an implementation framework for the Paris Agreement. How do we get the Paris Agreement working? The strategic action plan, or rather, and the required legislations in countries. We haven't been able to do that yet. But I think countries must now get around to implement the Paris Agreement. Now, the rule book that they are trying to agree upon, that's going to take another generation. So we have the Paris Agreement, and then it's going to take another generation to get the rule book. The rule book being how you implement it. So I think we need to reform the UN process. In the Maldives, we are researching a lot on how to grow coral and how to survive, how to float. I don't think that we would succeed if we try to work against nature. We can't build water breakers, but we can harness the waves. So we must find solutions where we are able to work with nature, not against it. So the work that we are doing in the Maldives is to see how we can grow a reef and how we can have a floating island. And we would hopefully show you the floating island soon. There's a Dutch company who has the designs now, and they're going to do a floating golf course. What role can we play? What role can the people play? I think, now someone's going to lose the election and someone's going to win the election soon here. When we lose an election, political parties usually, they go into a circle where they kind of start thinking, now we must have some new idea for the next circle. So when they lose this election, whoever loses this election, will have to find another narrative to sell to the people. I think you should join your local political party groups and make sure that the next manifesto is a green manifesto. The next pledge, the number of pledges that politicians are going to make during the elections. Let's try and see that they are green pledges. And I think for us to most effectively do this is to make sure that the manifesto building process of political parties are done by you. And I think that's very easy to do. You can join in whatever political party that you want to. And then see that they come out with these measures instead of their mad ones that they're going to come out with now and advocate to you. So there's a lot you can do, and constructively and structurally.
Very short, quick.
Thank you, sir. I would just like to ask you that you said that we don't need to focus on ethics anymore. But I see a paradox because you are trying to justify the economics are going to win, and let's not talk about Trump then. I see some inherent contradiction in that. But besides that, I've heard in European Policy Research Institute, some cutting-edge economists are agreeing that human beings do not choose only based on rationality. They are going for ethics, they are going for values. And if we talk about elections, we talk about involving common people. I guess we need to support the climate, the whole idea with ethics as well. And let us not lose, this is my humble suggestion, that let us not lose that.
Well, yes. I'm not suggesting that this is not an ethical issue. It's an ethical issue. For us, it's a human rights issue. We're just simply going to die. That's not a very nice thing to do. It is, you can't deny that. This is an ethical issue. But it's very difficult to sell an ethical issue to the vast majority of the people, unless it has an economic argument to it, or a strategic interest in it. So I think just bring in all these other elements. Yes, of course. But we need to bring in, if we pretend us to be so ethical and the moral high ground for us, and then keep on lecturing everyone else, yes, I like doing that. I've been advocating for human rights for a very long time, but still people torture each other. But if we can find an economic argument to that, and if we could point out to the markets, if we could point out that you are going to get poor, if you change, you are going to get rich. So just basically, I have $100, you will have $200 tomorrow if you change. So I think if we start selling the economic argument, it's far easier to sell. Yes, it is an ethical argument. There's no doubt about it.
We'll carry it on. The point is clearly, nobody has not the ethical argument. You cannot sell an ethical argument very easily. It passes off. It needs induction and reinduction. An economic argument normally, if it makes sense to me. If I'm getting clean power cheaper than solar power, I'll go for the clean power. Period. I think that is the essential point. If it's pragmatic and therefore go in for more investments in greener technologies so that economies of scale come in, so that the costs start coming down, so that people become more attractive to people. That's the argument. Germany's problem arose because they had switched so much to solar that the grid was getting disrupted and again and again. Obviously, it needs greater work to do how to stabilize the grid. So these are permanent issues going to happen, but thank you very, very much. It has been a very, very... any last words, President?
Just one last little thing is, my view of how we can change the UNFCCC process is, instead of asking countries to cut emission, we can ask countries, how much are you going to invest in renewables? So instead of asking them to reduce their carbon emissions, countries can come up and say, we are going to spend so much on renewables. So countries have agreed, developed countries have agreed to give 0.7% of their GDP every year to us, but they're never doing that. But if you ask them to invest in their own economies, I think it might work.
You know, President Nasheed reminded us about the negotiators who've been negotiating for so long they've become a community by themselves. I have spent about 6-7 years in the international development community. And let me assure you, the international development community, when they meet, it costs more than $70 million. And they meet to reduce poverty, of course. But I'll leave it aside. I think it has been a very, very rich listening to you, understanding why in practical terms. Sitting in Delhi, as I said, we complain about the weather, we do nothing about the weather, when we can do things about the weather. But to face a situation like the Maldives, as I said, I mentioned Bangladesh, I'm glad, President, you did so. The low-lying Gangetic parts of Bangladesh. This is an issue of survival. So it's not an issue of let's discuss, let's do something, let's talk about it. I think that message has, Excellency, you brought it very, very strongly, in very strong language, and I think we need that constant hammering, the induction and the reinduction, that we really act on it. I'm glad to see our incoming High Commissioner to Maldives also here, our older ambassador, our High Commissioner also there. I think the fact is that Maldives is so close to us. For us, we are such a large country, when we turn, we don't notice what we do. But I think if you're from Maldives and see it differently, I think it obviously makes a lot of difference how the elephant moves. So if we reduce our emissions a lot, by going for cleaner technologies, it is incrementally, I think it will definitely have beneficial effects, not just in India, but in the whole neighborhood. Let me thank you, sir, for coming here. It was a pleasure listening to you and interacting with all of us. And thank you to the audience. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you.